Hi, I'm Caroline.
And I'm Adrienne.
And this is Scandal Sheets. Hello and welcome to Scandal Sheets, the podcast that explores the scandals of history along with the people and places associated with them. I am your host, Caroline.
And I'm your also host, Adrienne.
And we have a live studio audience tonight. How excited are we?
2 people strong.
Thank you, Liz and Aaron, for joining us. They're 2 devoted listeners who are actually learning stuff, which is really great, and the whole point of this podcast. So,
Yes.
Yay, us.
And feel free to become a studio audience in the future.
Right,
but
let
you have
us
to
know.
apply. Aaron and Liz just got a free pass, but
Yes.
future studio listeners will have to apply.
Yes. Aaron
Yep.
and Liz are awesome because we drink beer with them on a regular basis.
We do.
So they got the free pass.
But we had to bring beer.
That's true.
Yeah, they had to bring
They did
beer.
have to bring beer, yeah.
So,
And I've had 2 glasses of rosé already, so this is going to be an interesting show because I haven't had dinner.
oh, jeez.
All the booze on an empty stomach. Fun times for us.
You'll be fine. You have purple chips.
Yeah, I do have purple chips.
And there's still some shrimp chips left.
No,
Okay.
never again. I've sworn off the shrimp chips. It's not happening.
You did eat 2, which I was really impressed with.
Yes, and that was only because the first one didn't really taste like shrimp. It was the second one that
the
tasted
second
like
one?
shrimp.
Okay.
Yes, the first one was a stunt chip or something. I think it was like a lure or something.
I
to,
planned that.
It lulled me into complacency.
All right.
Okay, so last week we were talking about the Astor family, and beyond the fact that they like to repeatedly use the same name in each generation, they were extremely rich and owned a lot of New York.
That sounds like some of the other families that we've discussed.
That's true. And they like to have squabbles amidst themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So
And parties.
and parties, lots
And
of parties.
mistresses.
We didn't really get into the mistresses thing, although
Not yet.
Well, see that, and that's debatable. So that's part of the reason why I fell down the rabbit hole of newspaper research today, was trying to prove that JJ had mistresses, and I don't think he did.
We need like a bonus conspiracy theory episode for the Astors.
Well, I had a conspiracy theory earlier today.
You did.
I was like, so Stanford White designed Astor Courts, which we talked about last week, and now I'm convinced that he and JJ's wife, Ava, had an affair and possibly a child.
Bonus episode.
Yeah.
And we know Stanford White's reputation.
Yeah. But, I mean, I guess on a more historical note, he did like the chorus girls and not the women in his own class. So
That's true.
Probably not. But I had a little fun thinking about it for like 30 seconds. So, anyway.
Fun to speculate.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So, let's kind of recap, but not totally recap, sort of pick up where we left off with J.J. Astor. So, John Jacob Astor IV. And yes,
Not a back house.
Not a back house. And I really want to call him John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt.
Oh my god.
I kept thinking about that all
That
the
takes
time.
me back.
I
I hadn't even thought about that. That's funny.
So, but we're going to stick with JJ. He was known as JJ or Jack often.
Okay.
So he married Ava Willing of Philadelphia in February of 1891. February 17th to be exact. Remember that date. I think it's very important.
Okay.
Reportedly, Ava was spoiled and vain. Of course, we'll never know for certain, but we do know that their marriage was a business transaction as opposed to a love match.
And this was the marriage where she didn't need money. She had her own
that
money.
was
that was previous
JJ's
generation.
mom,
Okay.
Caroline. Yeah.
Okay.
So we know it was pretty standard for couples to be matched based on their social standing and their money.
Okay.
So, but I did find it kind of interesting that he chose her because she was from Philadelphia and he was a pretty like gold standard catch, so to speak, in New York City. So why did he go, over there? Now, I did find interesting things as I started digging into newspapers today. A newspaper reported that he had been close to Miss Grace Wilson.
Was this one in Toledo?
No, it was not. It was it was Buffalo Inquirer, I think.
Okay.
So Miss Grace Wilson was apparently one of his sort of flings is probably not the right word because they were clearly not having a fling, but they were together a lot.
Okay.
Now, she was one of the marrying Wilsons. They literally got that nickname because all of the siblings had advantageous marriages. So it was actually even Grace's brother, Orme. I'm assuming that's how they pronounce his name.
How do you spell that?
Orme. Orme?
I don't know.
I was putting a little accent.
I know,
on
that's
you
what
at
I would
the
say
end
too.
because it sounded
I
good.
agree.
But who knows? So,
and they were in a position in society where they could be married well.
Right, exactly. They were wealthy, but they were kind of upstarts. So they were kind of that nouveau riche thing. So she wasn't necessarily considered a catch, but her brother married one of JJ's sisters. So I just initially would want to say that it's a little bit different for men versus women, but that's not entirely true because we find out in this article that Grace Wilson is engaged to Cornelius Vanderbilt. And his family disowned him because he married her. Oh. So, yeah, like most of the family's fortune went to his younger brother, Alfred, because he married without consent or whatever.
Who was the Biltmore estate Vanderbilt?
That was George Vanderbilt.
Okay. How is this related? Cousin, uncle?
Brother or possible nephew.
Okay.
I can't remember. No, he would have been his brother, I think. Okay. No, it would have... Maybe.
It was around the same... I mean, it's the same
generation.
Time,
yeah, same generation. Okay. So either a brother or possible cousin, because they would have been... Yeah, I know. The Vanderbilts, they had so many flipping kids. It was ridiculous. So anyway... So that went on with Grace Wilson. We know that they were together and then they weren't. And so he ended up marrying Ava instead. So a lot of the information that we covered last week was covered in this article that I found. We're starting with the newspapers early tonight. Just found so many good ones.
Jeez. Print's really small.
Yeah, I know. I should have brought my sexy librarian glasses, but I didn't. So I'm going to have to squint.
I don't even have a... Oh, there's an app for that.
It like magnifies it?
Yeah, there is.
That kind of freaks me out.
That freaks you out? Of all apps that could freak you out, a magnifying glass?
Yeah, just a bit. I mean, I don't know. It just bothers me. I don't know. I'd rather squint. Okay, so...
Don't hurt your eyes.
From the Harrisburg Independent of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, good. So we're getting into
We're on the East Coast.
Okay.
Astor and Willing families. Where they originated, who they were, what they are. Historical and biographical resume.
And this is Ava?
This is Ava. So I was kind of curious exactly where she came from and what recommended her to be married to an Astor.
Yeah.
So, from the New York Tribune. So as we've talked before, a lot of these newspapers picked up articles from other newspapers that were well known. So
sure.
The name Astor is with Americans, as with English, the synonym for wealth. And the marriage of a son and heir of a branch of that family is looked upon as a matter of importance, almost equal, if not exceeding, in interest, the marriage of a son of a reigning house in a monarchical country. The bridegroom, John Jacob Astor, is about 24 years of age. He was actually 27.
That's about 24.
Right, okay. And for the last 3 years has been identified with the most prominent young set in New York and Newport society. He attended Harvard University, but never graduated. Oh. He is tall, quite 6 feet in height, with strongly marked features resembling his mother, who was Miss Caroline Schwemmerhorn, rather than his father. Though fond of all social pleasures, young Mr. Astor's tastes have assumed a mechanical bent. But not long ago, he patented a brake for a bicycle, which is considered useful and practical.
I remember you mentioning that last week.
That's right.
Yeah.
He is interested in nautical matters and can tell to a fine point the cost of running one of the great ocean steamships. And in his frequent crossings, he has made himself familiar with the duties of every man on deck. Though never identified with leaders of cotillions, on certain occasions, he has acquitted himself with credit in that capacity, and last winter led with much success the New Year's dance at Tuxedo Park, his partner being Miss Mabel van Rensselaer. Those random Dutch names. It is hardly necessary to touch upon the history of the Astor family. And the Willing family in Philadelphia is one of those families which have made the state of Pennsylvania famous. The Magazine of American History says that the town of Wilmington, Delaware, was started by Thomas Willing, whose father-in-law, a Swede, owned the site. The settlement was first styled Willingtown. The name was afterward changed to Wilmington. The first of the Willing family to achieve special prominence was Charles Willing, a great shipping merchant who was one of the founders of the University of Pennsylvania and who twice elected mayor of Philadelphia, 1748 and 1754. Women of the Willing family have been noted for their beauty, a prominent member being Anne Willing, who married the merchant William Bingham in 1780, and afterward at the court of Louis XVI gained great admiration.
So the Willings were a pretty big family. So that's how she got an Astor.
Yeah, well, I'll skip to the bottom. Miss Willing was prominently brought to the notice of people in New York society when she passed the season at Newport 2 years ago. From her first appearance, Mr. Astor has been her admirer, and at various times it has been reported that they were engaged, but as often the rumor was denied. Miss Willing's father, even last summer, sent a letter of denial to the press. When an announcement appeared 5 weeks ago, it was quickly denied by Mrs. Astor and Mrs. Willing, but was formally announced 2 weeks later by both ladies after the consent of Mr. Astor, who was then abroad, had been obtained.
So they wanted to talk about it on their terms.
Right.
Or announce it.
Exactly.
But they met in Newport?
Yeah. Look. Her hair is dark brown and her complexion wonderfully clear and fresh. Slanting eyebrows add piquancy to her face. When in conversation, her face lights up and she becomes far more attractive. She's probably not more than 22 years of age. So yes, that's the history of Ava Willing. She apparently was Philadelphian royalty.
Okay.
So
that was a good match then.
Yeah. So despite Ava being from Philadelphia, the two had met many times. I still find it interesting that he chose her since he had been linked to these other socialites in the past. Mm-hmm. But we know that JJ was a bit of a mama's boy, and that might have turned off many women, particularly when that mother was the rather imperious Caroline Astor. Mm-hmm. So after a 5-month honeymoon around Europe, they settled in a fully furnished Fifth Avenue mansion in New York City, and Ava was pregnant almost immediately. Their son, William Vincent Astor, was born November 15th, 1891. So exactly 8 months and 28 days after their marriage. The birth was announced right away in the papers throughout the U.S., which I find interesting, and I'll read an excerpt later on when we get down to some of my conspiracy theories.
Okay.
So we know now that JJ and Ava were poorly suited. Much like his father and mother, the two began living separate lives following the birth of their son. Just how separate is up for debate. Now, following the great family squabble between Caroline Astor and her nephew, William Waldorf, that resulted in William pulling down his father's former home and building a 13-story hotel next to his aunt's house, Caroline and JJ commissioned a new home at 840 and 841 Fifth Avenue. In 1896, the house was completed, and JJ and Ava moved into 840, and Caroline moved into 841. So apparently the two houses operated separately, but the architect, Richard Morris Hunt, designed them to appear like they were like one from the outside. Yeah. Turns out there were removable walls between the two residences, and they would often take them down to unite the ballrooms. Also found a great article that said that the costliest room in the house was Ava's private bathroom, which was, quote, Roman in design, and featured a bathtub carved from a solid block of marble. The bathtub also had statuettes of cupids and dolphins carved from that same block of marble.
How big is this bathtub?
Apparently huge. You could go swimming in it.
Sounds like it.
So the rumors regarding the status of their marriage, I couldn't really pinpoint how they got started, so we can only speculate about that. It could have been something that was just sort of whispered about in society. But if you look at newspaper articles during the decade following their marriage, they're often mentioned together. They traveled a great deal to Europe, basically once a year, and then they were often at home together, and they hosted dinners and balls. Mm-hmm. Ava in particular was followed closely. The papers would write about the balls she attended, the clothes she was wearing. She apparently was a great fan of Charles Worth, who was one of the most well-known and expensive fashion designers. Yeah. at that time.
Well, I guess they would have to keep up appearances, right? I mean, whatever's happening.
Right.
Like when you're an Astor, like you know,
yeah,
people